Hello and welcome to another episode of Pakistanomy. My name is Uzair, and if you've been a regular listener of this podcast, you know Ariba Shahid by now. I have Ariba on the podcast every time I want to do a rundown of where the economy is, where it's headed, long-term direction or not long-term, but sort of quarter by quarter or half-year assessment of where things are. Today, we're going to be talking about something a little different, given that Ariba is a big State Bank of Pakistan fan. If you follow her on Twitter, you know this by now that she follows very closely what the bank is up to, everything from Bank ke Kunde, which I will ask Ariba to explain what kundas are for the bank, to whether it's being proactive, to a whole host of memes Ariba's created over the last 3+ years related to the bank. So I figured that we should talk with Ariba about her views on the journey the central bank has been over the last 3.5 years. Of course, during this time, Governor Baqir was running the show for the last 3 years. His tenure just ended. So it's a good time to assess where the bank was, where it's come to, what it's excelled at. And there's a lot that it has excelled at and a lot of missteps, which is natural for any institution. So, Ariba, first of all, welcome back to Pakistanomy. And let's
Hi,
dive
Uzair.
in. Yeah,
Hi,
let,
Uzair.
let's
Let's do this.
Yeah, so start with like what in the last 3.5 years has happened with the central bank that you and others like you on Twitter who follow the bank have been quite, optimistic, encouraged, excited by.
So it's really crazy. The past 3 years have been so a very basic metric by the central bank is the policy rate, right? So if you look at the policy rate, it went like from 5% ish to like 13.25%, and then the pandemic hit, and then we went to 7%, and now we're back to 12 point something percent, like back to almost the high of 13.25 that we witnessed in. So this has happened within 3 years, right? It's just like a massive hiking policy rate, and then massive easing, and then again massive hiking. So that's been happening. So it just goes in line with how crazy the times are. Like, we had a global pandemic going on, so there's a lot that's happened at the state bank over the past few years. And the state bank has moved beyond the regular policy rate, regulating banks stuff that it does, and it's tried to get present, and it's tried to move into the current generation or century that we're in. And there have been lots of things that have happened. A few months ago, we heard that the central bank is looking into central bank digital currencies. Then a few months later, we heard that the central bank does not like cryptocurrencies. There's just so much happening. Digital banking licenses coming out, regulations changing. So if we look at the central bank, not only are we going to talk macro today, but we're also going to talk about regulatory changes that have impacted the whole system. So the past 3 years, to be very honest, have been very interesting considering the amount of steps that have been taken, and where the central bank has moved beyond just its role as a regulator and a macroeconomic engine.
What are some of those specifics? Let's dive into that. I mean, because look, there's a lot that they've done. Everything from Russian digital accounts, which initially when it was launched, I remember I was one of them and a few others that did not really think it would be a great product. And initially, it wasn't structured as a good product, but then the bank stepped in and redeveloped the product, and it's been a stellar success. It's been growing, even though in the last month, for example, people have said overseas Pakistanis should take out their money because of regime change, but it hasn't happened. The data Ali Khizr just put it out yesterday or day before yesterday that in April, the numbers grew by about 4 to 5% in RDA deposits. Some criticize that, saying that this is just hot money that's coming into the country at high interest rates. But that's something that stands out to me, and this is not unique. Pakistan, as you said, was behind in this because there are the panda bonds, and overseas Indians can have deposits in India, etc. So the bank got on with it. Housing is another thing for me, and I would love your thoughts on this, and less so housing on the sort of people that you and I tend to sit with and know. But for me personally, at a personal level, and I've communicated this to folks in the bank as well, our family maid, who's been with us since I was a baby, was able to own her own home because of this program, right? And she's a property owner after years of hard work. was able to get a loan and now makes a payment. And this is her way to get wealth, right? Regularized, legal, documented apartment that she has a stake in now, which is amazing. This is like, and a lot of people have availed that. And we miss that when we talk about real estate, for example. So from your point of view, what were some of the things that when you look back 3 years ago to now and you say, you know what, this is where the bank has had an outsized impact on people's lives, so to speak?
So to answer the RDA part of what you said, when I spoke to Dr. Baqir about RDA, and I was a little critical with the question in the sense I was like, there's a lot of criticism about the state bank doing a lot more for overseas Pakistanis than it's doing for underseas Pakistanis. And Uzair, up overseas photo, I don't know if you feel that it's unfair, but we underseas Pakistanis started to feel jealous of you guys. But he had a really nice answer to this. And his answer was, the Roshan digital account is a connection that we're building between overseas Pakistanis and Pakistan. This is a connection that will stay over the years. So once you've established a good connection, it stays. And that is what his point was, is that we're trying to establish a good connection, a good experience, so that no matter what happens, ye Pakistan se jude rahe, they stay connected to Pakistan. And I feel that the State Bank has done a good job at RDA because the stickiness of the deposits shows that the connection mattered. It didn't matter who's in charge or who's at the state bank or who's in the government. The connection mattered. Secondly,
sorry to interrupt there, but I'll just add, in addition to the connection, what matters is that the yields are really good. I mean,
amazing yields. They were unfair. Not just amazing, they were unfair yields, and we've criticized them a lot, and it deserves a little criticism in the sense that it was, in a way, it encouraged leverage borrowing from countries where the interest rate was low, invest them into NPCs, and then, and when I addressed this question to the state bank, they were like, oh, but hamara to matlab nahi hai ki unko kahan se paise aa rahe. So not only that, but there was a document that was leaked, I think in January this year, where the state bank was pushing banks to like get leverage borrowing. So things like this were a little crazy, but and also, like, even though NPCs ka, let's say, maturities bhi aa gaye, some people are not reinvesting the money in certificates, and some are because rates or returns of itne zabardast nahi hai jitne pehle the. But keeping all that in mind, I think the RDA is a good way to regularize remittances into the country. They've come up with the RDA loyalty program, is something where they give you points as well. So things like these are out of the box solutions that will discourage Hawala Hundi as well. And when we're talking about
one more thing before you go to housing on RDA itself, one thing that I sort of, tongue in cheek, but I think it's a fair point, is that, they opened it up to car financing, which, I mean, again, it formalizes things, but in a very, if you look at it from a interesting way, it's actually exports of cars, because overseas Pakistanis are sending dollars to purchase cars for their family members in Pakistan. So it's technically a dollar flow to purchase cars, which I'm like, if you want to do that, more power to you.
It's making a gray economy, basically, because the car market in Pakistan, I don't know if the word is on or own, because I don't know, but the gray market, it's increasing the size, because what's happened is the demand for cars has increased drastically, and overseas Pakistanis get precedence over underseas Pakistanis when they make orders. Things like that are happening as well. And this was a consumption-driven growth method that the State Bank used, which again was something I even wrote about, and I wrote a really critical piece on this, because the Roshan Apni Car scheme was a consumption-driven growth method. And when the State Bank was asked about this, the spokesperson had clearly said that abhi tak humne, like, all the products that we had released, they were none of them were consumption driven, or it's something that a consumer could use. But this was the first consumer product that we launched, because a lot of people, when they live abroad, they want to buy cars for their families. And I understand, but again, when aapki gaadiyon ki industry is literally import based, I don't really see what.
And they don't care about investing enough in new technology or increased capacity to get rid of the on problem, which is again a whole different topic. But
the on problem is here to stay for a while.
Yeah, it's here to stay. But the question I had on RDA, and maybe you know this, maybe you don't. I was told that the next step was going to be allowing overseas Pakistanis through their RDA accounts to invest in the stock market. Has that happened, or is that still a work in process?
So no, the overseas Pakistanis can invest in the stock market through RDA. And one good thing that the RDA did is it's a digital process from start to end. So you can open a bank account from start to end all digitally. And what it did is the trigger effect is that now you can open up a local bank account from start to end digitally. So they're trying to revamp that. And in addition to that, now you can also open a stock account digitally. So it started with RDA and now they've released it for underseas Pakistanis as well. So RDA basically acted like a base case. So because the number of overseas Pakistanis opening accounts is few, the number of local people opening up accounts are higher. So they tried everything with RDA first, and when it worked out, they implemented it locally. So you can invest in the stock exchange through RDA, the same way a Pakistani can open up a brokerage account too.
Yeah, and I've been arguing for the last 2 weeks now that what they need to do with this government and the state bank is open up zero balance bank accounts for every single Pakistani citizen who has an Aadhaar ID and use that to give direct benefits instead of these convoluted subsidies that are leaky and people who deserve it don't get. But that's a separate topic. So that's RDA. I think I agree with you. The connection part is extremely valuable. It formalizes remittances. It opens up new opportunities where, there's less friction in moving money into Pakistan or moving money out of Pakistan through that. And I just think that formalization by reducing friction is awesome, especially in a country where to this day, I have friends and family members who are like, yaar, Pakistan paise bhijwane hain, kaise bhijwaएं? And I'm like, bro, ID, आपके पास है ना, कॉपजी है, तो आप जाएं आरडीए खोल लें, बस उसमें क्या आपने बाकी लोगों से क्या करना है काम, right? But people are still, the awareness is still catching on. It's not penetrated as much as it should.
On a lighter note, Uzair, what did you think of the RDA song?
Well, no, that is a separate. We'll get to the criticisms of the bank, and that perhaps lies in that bucket in that section. But let's move to housing. What's happened in the housing sector?
Yeah. So in the housing sector, a lot of us have been really vocal about how the housing sector and the initiatives that the state bank has made for the housing and construction sector have, primarily been targeting rent seekers and things of the sort. But there are cases where, like for instance, your maid, like for instance, one of my old maids, they have been able to secure loans. They have been able to get housing, cheap, affordable housing, which is like the basic, it's like a basic necessity, right? So with that done, that was great. And there have been a lot of times that the state bank has revisited the process as well. When you go into a bank and when you actually research, a lot of people have suggested that the number of housing loans that were given out were primarily to bank employees. And I understand that is fair criticism. But and because hamare banks are primarily really conservative when it comes to lending, so it's easier for them to lend to their employees because you can deduct their salaries directly. But at the end of the day, we need to realize that one, it should have been spread out more, but two, the banking employees that got these loans, they're also not as well off as one would hope, right? I mean, buying a house, like someone who has a job in Pakistan will never be able to buy a house if they aren't able to secure a loan. And securing a loan is a big challenge, especially when banks in Pakistan would just rather loan to the government. So there's that. And of course, people like your maid, people like my maid, people who actually need a loan should get better access to it, and there should be more awareness. The state bank, while we're going to criticize the song, but the state bank has been trying to get the message out in a lot of ways. And it's very difficult to target people like, for instance, maids. I'm just giving an example. Is because one, they may not have access to television. They may not be watching the news because they may not want to, right? So these are a few challenges that they face. And the only way to oppose those challenges or to face those is that when, let's say, for instance, your family told your maid about the initiative, I told my maids about the initiative, things like that. So awareness remains a challenge in Pakistan, especially in a society where the word bank is considered a Yahudi sazish. So that remains a challenge. But the state bank has been trying to be more approachable and less serious state bank, don't talk to me kind. So that is something that people may see two ways. I see that as a good sign.
Yeah, and I
But then
think
again, gaane nahi nikale.
I'll add to that a bit in the sense that to me, the bank employee criticism, I agree with you. I think there's an easy way to deal with that criticism is that if we had, for example, data on, and this should be part of their databases already, which is what's the median income of the people receiving these loans, right? Even if they're bank employees.
Like Uzair, jokes aside, a relationship manager, a manager earns around 40 to 50,000 rupees in Pakistan, which I don't think that makes you able to buy a house.
Yeah,
If you're a single income earner, I don't think you could ever buy a house, despite being a manager. So I think the median income matters, not the position matters. So if someone from the middle class, the lower middle class, is able to buy a house through these loans using their bank, I say it's good.
I agree. And I think the second thing which two other things that I particularly like about the direction with this focus on housing is that one, it allows a previously unbanked, we talk about financial inclusion, right? A previously largely unbanked segment of the population access to financial instruments, which promotes inclusion, right? So all of a sudden, people we know who are not elite, who are not privileged, who did not have somebody open up a bank account, and opening up a bank account itself is a hassle in Pakistan, right? Now they're part of the banking system. So they own a home, they're making payments, they get familiar with how banks work. It allows the rate of financial inclusion to pick up, or the growth of financial inclusion to pick up, and that has effects in your broader economy, number one. Number two, which is even more important, is that because it's going through the formal channels, all of a sudden more and more people will have housing as an asset, which is disclosed, which is not a common thing in Pakistan because of all the convoluted processes people use. So it formalizes wealth, and by extension, it allows people and the state to tax that wealth and reinvest it, right? Because all of a sudden that capital is documented. And I think that has a huge impact. Just over here, I'm living in the United States. Housing is a huge part of the economy. And it became too big in the sense that in 2008 caused a global crisis, financial crisis. Yes, but it is important across the world, even in India, where housing is considered as a means to enable upward social mobility. And we need
Pakistan has one of the lowest mortgage rates in the world, like one of the lowest mortgage rates. And that's something that Pakistan really needs to work on. So yeah, of course, like it's nice that we're moving towards the formalization of the sector. And like, of course, every policy can be criticized and appreciated. So I feel that when we're criticizing, we need to look at the good stuff too. So like you said, of course, there will be people that do not deserve to benefit, but still benefit. But we cannot ignore the people that actually benefited and it was targeted at them.
Yeah, and I think you'll agree with me on this as well. Like my own thing over the last 3 years or so of following what the bank has been doing is at least there are new things being tried to solve old challenges, right? And so rather than sticking to the old thing and continuing to be like ye pehle bhi ho chuka hai, at least we have something new. And yes, there are faults and yes, there will be mistakes, but we can debate that, and at least policy will evolve with something new coming in the pipeline.
Yeah, of course. Like for instance, in the past, in the startup space or any space whatsoever, investment into the country was a challenge. All right, the state bank sat down, was like, oh, fine, what do you want? How do you want us to address it? It was a hit and miss, and then they finally got it out. They got it right, and you could see that last year went really well for Pakistan as well. So the nice thing is, like, even with the housing, even with the regulatory changes, it was a step towards the right direction with the right intentions, which is really important. And I feel that that just sets the precedence for the next governor or whoever's coming up next. And like I started off, the state bank looked beyond just regulating banks and making sure they're not doing anything wrong. And also like setting up the macro environment, the state bank looked beyond that. Come on, let's build a level playing field. Let's get more people financially included. Let's make the whole process interesting. Let's bring in foreign overseas Pakistanis into the mix. Let's bring in tech. So I feel that the past 2 or 3 years, Pakistan has moved beyond the Babu mindset that we had. taxes बढ़ाओ, regulation बढ़ाओ, things like that. So I genuinely appreciate that.
Yeah,
It
you
was a
mentioned.
new thought process.
Yeah, I agree. And I think you mentioned the tech ecosystem. So perhaps that is a segue into something I personally am excited about, would love your thoughts on, is Rust, which has been rolled out. It's still scaling up, early days in terms of where it goes. But if you look around the world, UPI to me stands out as sort of the gold standard in India about digital payments. I've seen chaiwalas take QR codes in India. India's finance minister Nirmala Sitharaman was at the Atlantic Council a couple of weeks ago, and she, in her public remarks, talked about this farmer who was selling vegetables on the sidewalk during COVID, and she was like, "I stopped and I said, I want to buy some of your produce. How much is it?" She began to take out cash, and the farmer lady was like, "Nahi, nahi, here's my QR code. Isko scan karke, and you should pay me. I'm not taking cash because of COVID," right? It's been revolutionary in India and in other parts of the world. So Rast, we're a bit behind, but I see tremendous potential in that. And of course, digital banks coming up and all of that. How have you seen that digital payments focus play out at the bank?
So Rust, again, so for instance, like sometimes when I'm transferring someone money, and even though they have Rust or they might have Rust, let's say I know that they have Rust, it's just like it just comes naturally to IBFT, interbank transfer funds, right? But then I realize after mere paise karte hain, transfer funds ke, oh, I should have used Rust. So I guess there are 2 or 3 things that Rust needs to work on. One is publicity and awareness. The second thing is that if someone has Rust, then the IBFT option should just directly be Rust instead of that. I think that should be worked out on. But I guess so that's really interesting. 2 days ago, I went to buy a suitcase, and this was like a non-tech store. They did not have a cash register, no point of sale system or whatever. And the guy, I did not have cash because I didn't really go to buy a suitcase. I just liked one, and I was like, "Chalo, buy kar leti hu." So when I asked him, "Okay, can I like transfer you money, or do I go to the ATM?" And he's like, "Yeah, sure." And I was like, "Rast hai?" And he's like, "Oh, I was about to set mine up today. Can you help me?" So the guy knew about Rust. I just wanted someone to walk him through it. And I walked him through it, and he was like, "Oh, so ab mere koi charges nahi lagenge?" And I was like, "No." And it was brilliant. Like I showed him how I did it, and it was brilliant. And people are really interested. So what he did is that he told his brother, "Ab tumhara Rust set karunga." So it's like a trigger effect, and people in Pakistan are now willing. So what COVID did is that it brought in a lot of people into e-commerce. All right. And even though cash on delivery is a predominant method of payment in Pakistan, some people have started using, electronic or digital money in that form. And as a result, what's happened is that people are now more accepting to that. So in the past, if I would have gone to the store and said, "Main aapko transfer karungi," he would have been a little hesitant because the instant messages for nahi aate. What if it's fraud? What if that? But people are more trusting now. And I feel that the ecosystem is only going to grow because with Rust, like 2 steps have been rolled out, more are rolling out, push to pay, etc., etc. So when more steps are rolled out, it's going to be big. So while the awareness at this level is low, just as time goes on, it will be big. And keeping that in mind and keeping the momentum at which Pakistan's moving towards digitalization, especially in the urban areas, it's going to be really interesting because what Rust provides an opportunity for a lot of fintechs to grow. And it's going to be interesting seeing who manages to capitalize on that. Because so far, the number of traditional banks that we have, they've been really underwhelming at the digital transition. And the whole process has been really annoying as a consumer for lots of people. So the new people coming in, the startups coming in have really given them a tough time to the extent that so many banks are now fighting for digital banking licenses in hopes that, they can reinvent themselves as a digital bank or something. But it's really interesting considering Rust. And going forward, I can only see it grow. But yeah. And when you have an inflationary environment, I really feel that after a while, carrying money gets a little annoying. So maybe the inflation will also push people towards digital transactions.
Yeah, and I agree on the awareness side. And so I'll put you on the spot really quickly to explain how people can set up Brass, number one. And two, if anyone from the State Bank is listening, I think instead of creating songs or things like that, what they ought to be doing, which I think they haven't done, and they need to get a grip on this, is get a handful of social media influencers, YouTubers, TikTokers, Instagram people, and have them tell them how Rast is set up and ask them to make videos and vlogs or
Yeah.
whatever, 10 steps to open up a Rast account, right? Or connect with Rast. And I
But
think
like
that will
that is
significantly
something
increase uptake.
that is something banks also need to do. So the state bank needs to make sure the banks push this out, because you can only use Rast through your bank. So for instance, let's say I have a bank account. Ab ye ho raha hai ki when you open up your bank account, the first image that pops up is like set up Rast or use Rast. So now it's like a reminder to use Rast to set up Rast. So what you do is you go into your banking app, you log in, and the option comes in to use Rast. If the option doesn't come, then settings option menu mein jaake choose Rast, and then set up your account with your mobile number. One mobile number goes up with one account. So I have two accounts and two mobile numbers. So one account with one mobile number, one account with one mobile number. I wanted to send one of my friends money because I need to. So I put in his number and his name showed up. I sent him money.
His phone number, right?
His phone number. So it's really easy. Like sometimes now when you go out to eat and you're fighting over who pays the bill. So if you know the other person has Rast, you could just go like, de do bill, and then you just bam, send them money. And then if you go into a war where they send you back money, it's not costing you anything because the transfer fees is free. So like आप पूरे दिन खेलते रहो, एक दूसरे को पैसे भेजते रहो.
Yeah, I would not recommend that, but that's a system down ho gaya. But I think it's an exciting development, long time coming, and one hopes that we reach a place where the bhutta wala outside the masjid has a QR code that you and I can make the payment to. I think that would be truly revolutionary. I've seen that.
So QR codes haven't really worked in Pakistan. So in the past, banks really tried making QR codes work. And what they did is, like, for instance, Pizza Hut, and other food places, what they would do is they would sell 100 rupees ka pizza or 100 rupees ka burgers, and you'd have to scan through your banking app. And they really tried that, but people would only use it to scan for the deal, but they would never use it to pay. So QR codes, for some reason, haven't really worked in Pakistan.
Yeah, I think there's a barrier. Again, it's information, right? It's one of those things that, for example, the suitcase guy you were at, right? Typically what happens that in the Indian example, because I know that most closely, is that the onboarder is not a bank, or it could be a bank, but it's interoperable QR codes. So if Habib Bank sets it up, or another bank sets it up, or a new fintech sets it up, it works across the board. And what they do, because they're all competing for merchant options, right, is Google Pay in India, Phone Pay, Paytm, etc. They all have feet on the street that onboard people like the suitcase guy you were at.
We don't have that.
We don't have that, right? And so what they do as part of creating the UPI linkage for that merchant is put a QR code with their own logo saying Google Pay, but it works across the board. And so it becomes a habit over time where people are on their phone, and with the pandemic, they become more comfortable with QR codes, is that they'll just scan, instead of asking, Bhaijan, aapka phone number kya hai?
Phone number kya hai?
So he'll be like, ye QR code hai, so scan kar do, and it works, right? I think we can get there. Again, it's about building confidence. It's about educating people. It's about reaching out to them.
It's a step-by-step thing, and we have potential. We absolutely have potential. The economy does not resist digitalization the way it did before. But again, we do resist digitalization when it leads to like formalization of our income and declaration of the income. So that is something that we need to work out on. And because that's not really the state bank's mandate, I guess, that's more of the government and FBR and fiscal side of things. But yeah, the resistance to being digital and the resistance to having like a formal bank account or like a formal, revenue income stream through that is just to avoid tax.
So let's move into some of the things that perhaps you and I did not like over the last 3 years, and I'll let you lead the way and then I'll chime in. But you obviously had some memes about State Bank not being proactive recently. Things like OMO issues. Bank ke kunde has been a popular term on social media.
Can I explain kunde before we go on?
Yes,
all right.
Please.
So I heard the word kunda for the first time in my life when Shaukat Tareen said it on TV. And मैं माना कि मैं थोड़ी burger होंगी कि मैंने कभी kunda नहीं सुना. But so I've asked a lot of people and I've got multiple explanations and I will explain them to you now. The first explanation is kunda is किसी का बुरा करना, किसी का कबाड़ा करना, सही है. The second is वो जो खीर जिन हांडियों में वो मटकियों में बिकती है ना वो. So what I've done is I've mixed the two. All right. So basically, when Shaukat Tareen said कि banks का कुंडा होने वाला है, he basically said कि वो जो मिट्टी के बर्तन हैं उससे उसको मारेंगे banks को. That's what he said. But ultimately, banks को उन्होंने नहीं मारा, banks ने उनको मार दिया. But what happened is that there's been a lot that's happening that is under criticism. So when the state bank cut the policy rate drastically during COVID, Reza Baqir was known as one of the most aggressive central bankers in the world. And he was called really proactive. All right, लेकिन वो सारी proactiveness ना खत्म हो गई थी like around August-ish, because when June 2021 से लेके the market had shown that the money supply had increased and demand pull inflation शुरू होने लग गई थी पाकिस्तान में. So if you followed Pakistan, you'd know that. So in Baqir's 3 years, the first year we had cost push inflation because of supply shortages and corruption-related issues. The second year we had COVID. And the third year we had a global commodity pricing issue, which is given us inflation again grows. And the third year, not only do we have global commodity prices rising around the world, but we also had demand pull inflation in Pakistan. So the state bank was supposed to increase the policy rate to control the money supply, but they did it pretty slowly and they did it late. So when you increase the money, if you increase the policy rate late, the markets are already ahead of you because they've started pricing in a policy rate hike before you. And as a result, the yields of the auctions that were happening had gone up significantly. And then the state bank followed the markets and increased the policy rates by a drastic 2.5%. Now, and I'm going to say 250 basis points to sound smarter. Anyway.
And that 250 basis points was also still behind the curve.
It was still behind the curve, but back then, Baqir said, oh, we did 2.5 to give the market a message. And now the state bank had come up with the word forward guidance. Like, of course, forward guidance exists, but they had used it well in the past. But like August ke baad, I think they forgot how to use it. So they would tell the markets that, you know what, this is going to happen. And the way that they would frame the policy statement would be so ambiguous that the markets were like, oh, mayhem aane wala hai, ab to policy rate go crazy.
I remember this. This is a very important point, Ariba, because I remember when this started happening, because I would actually, the monetary policy statement would come out, read it, highlight a line, and send it to a few people who are in the market a bit more in the know. And I would get a WhatsApp message from 3 different people with 3 different interpretations, right? And my alarm bells would start ringing because I'm like, if 3 people who are market participants, not your average Joe, are interpreting a line by the state bank in a monetary policy statement differently, then we have a problem, because you can't communicate like that.
You can't communicate like that. So basically, it got so bad that Dr. Baqir had to go on to Bloomberg and say, oh, we're not going to increase the policy rate for some time. And that was not enough. He had to release a 63-day OMO to calm the markets down and to actually put their money where the mouth is and say, ye lo, hum nahi badha rahe, kam se kam 63 days tak the policy rate's not going to go up. All right. That is how bad things had gone. All right. No one was believing what Baqir's saying on TV or articles or op-eds. He wrote an op-ed. He went on to Bloomberg. I interviewed him that week. There was so much happening. During that 1 week in the media about the policy rates and how they're going to go up or whatever. And Baqir's just saying the same thing, but no one believed him because the communication may not have been as clear, or because the markets were like, you know what, he's saying it, but he's not going to do it. So the state bank had to do a 63-day OMO, and they did it like around 4 times or something. And the previous highest was 17 days. So 17 kaha and 63 days. Kaha.
And in very simple terms, Ariba, sorry to interrupt you again, but for those who don't know what an OMO is, you explained Kunda brilliantly. Explain OMO as well.
So, okay. So, we've written an explainer on OMOs if you want to read it. Uzair will put the link in. But to put it in simple terms, what happens is that the central bank sometimes gives money injects liquidity into the banking system by giving them money. So the banks now have this money to spend in the auctions. Now, since they've got cheap money, they might bid at cheaper rates. So the yields for the government might come down. So the government might get cheaper credit. So the state bank is basically subsidizing lending to the government in a way through these injections. Mazid
details के लिए read the article, and I'll just even more simplify it. It's essentially like your mamu giving money to you to give to your ammi, because ammi ne directly mamu se nahi lena for whatever reason, and so she says, you know, mamu ne aapko ghar pe bulaya and mamu says, ye lo 5,000 rupees, I know your mom wants it, just pretend that it came from you.
No, basically ye lo 5,000 rupees, 4,000 ammi ko de dena.
Yeah, 1,000 जेब में रख लो. Yes. So for more, read the description.
Again, when I said banks का कुंडा शौकत ने threat किया था, तो banks का कुंडा नहीं हुआ. Banks को वो 1,000 रुपए मिल गए. Banks are partying, like banks are literally partying, and now when the policy rate's like 12%-ish, and only going to go high from this point, banks can just like park in their money for a really long time and make decent returns. And why would they lend to you or me when they can just lend to the government?
Yeah, or why would they invest in digitization when they're having a party time lending to the sovereign, which is a kunda party, and I think that's something.
No, Uzair, if you and I were treasurers, I would literally throw a party called Kunda Party, and I'm surprised that they haven't thrown a Kunda Party yet.
Maybe they have, and you're not invited so far, Ariba. Ho sakta hai. Sorry, but look, I think that's a key problem in the structural underpinnings. There have been raging debates. Our friend Two Paise, you, Amar, myself, Azam, a few others have been on Twitter talking about this, in the sense that my view on this always has been, yes, you can blame the state bank for this, but the state bank is playing catch up in an environment where the fiscal side of the equation, the economy is monetary plus fiscal, right? If the fiscal side is being indisciplined in its approach, then there's very limited room for the bank to do something on its own. And we have to accept that.
That's really brilliant of you to say. So basically, whenever we ask Baqir why the central bank is catching up with the banks, and he has a really standard response. Central bankers do not have crystal balls. And although he is right, but like, I kind of was hoping you have a crystal ball. But like, my point is that we need to realize that this is an economy recovering from COVID. And, you know, COVID being as sporadic as it is, like, you know, ekdam se it can come out and be disastrous. So the central bank may have been cautionary to go back to a tightening cycle, and I understand that. But on the same side, we criticize the central bank a lot for not being as monetary prudent, but we need to see that the fiscal side was actually frivolous. So while the central bank wasn't really conservative, which is generally like okay, but the fiscal side was really frivolous. It was handing out subsidies left, right, and center. And so that also increased the monetary supply. That also, the money supply in the country. So right now, in the environment that we're in, the policy rate is not basically to mop up our liquidity or our spending. The policy rate right now is essentially to make government lending more expensive. So the government then borrows less, and when it borrows less, when it's unable to borrow, it acts more prudent with its money.
Or it can. It can spend less, right? I think that's what I've been arguing as well, is that it's a backdoor way of.
It's not really happening because the state bank is subsidizing the lending through the OMOs, like 4 trillion this month. So essentially that should be happening, but it's not happening in essence.
I mean, again, it's the problem is that if the Ministry of Finance decides to not give two shits, pardon my language, about the fiscal deficit, then wo state bank kya karegi? They can only do so much, right? And they can raise rates to make it more costly. But even after it makes it more costly, if the finance ministry and the government still says we're going to give petroleum subsidies and expand this and that, then they just don't have anything in their toolbox to deal with a immature Ministry of Finance or an immature government, right?
Of course. So the central bank right now, let's say in a way, is not only regulating the banks, but it's also trying to regulate government spending through whatever means it has possible. So I'd be really interested to see whether this continues or this stops or what happens.
Yeah, we have a few more minutes left.
OMOs.
Yeah, we'll see where that goes. Obviously, inflation expectations are through the roof, especially if the petroleum subsidy goes away. And we'll see where that
We have to
takes
speak
us.
about one thing.
Yes, go ahead.
Ex-oil current account deficit.
Yes, I forgot I had a note on that. So what's your take? Are we in surplus, ex-oil and ex-palm oil?
I make a lot of fun of this stat because it's a funny stat. It's a made-up stat. I make a lot of fun of it, but I also believe that the point that Baqir is trying to make, or the point the state bank was trying to make with the stat is like, yaar, hum isse aur kam apna current account deficit nahi kar sakte. It's literally all oil that we're bringing in, right? Or, all oil, or we can bring this down. Like, this is ab isse aur kam nahi ho. So that's what they're trying to say. So I understand their dilemma, but the stat is really funny, man.
Actually, I would push back on that we can bring the oil import bill down. I mean,
of course, we can do that.
Yeah, the April data shows that 32% increase in consumption. Why is consumption gone up?
I mean, they're trying to say that the current account, ex-oil current account deficit, that can go down. The oil, of course, it can go down. Like, up petrol ki price badha do, and you're no longer subsidizing my road trips. Exactly. I'm not going to go on a road trip. Not like I do right now either.
And I think it's also a bit, I remember Shaukat Tareen last year, I think it was fall, late summer, I forget the month, but he was in Washington, made public remarks, and very openly said that our problem right now is too much growth. And I took a note down and said, yes, you have to figure out a soft landing. And then he went back, and the last 6 months since then of his government were a fiscal party. And I was like,
it's crazy. It's crazy because, like, the minute Shaukat Tareen came in, there was minimal effort to reduce the party or even curb back. Like, Shaukat Tareen's finance ministry is literally within the party. And the fuel subsidy that they left behind, politically, it was a really smart move. Fiscally, it was terrible for the country.
Yeah, and inflation is the highest tax on ordinary citizens, and when it gets unleashed, it will get unleashed. And I've been telling my friends that they should build a petrol slush fund. Imagine you're already paying 250 rupees a liter, not 150, because that's where it's going. If oil remains where it is right now in the global market, so that's a separate topic. Finishing up this conversation, Ariba, where does the bank go from here in your view? Obviously, the governor's tenure is up. We don't know who the next governor will be. There is, I think, predictable angst among many of us about who they pick, this new government picks, because their track record with what they do with the state bank is not that great. Ishaq Dar is on TV every other day talking about whether dollar is going 160, 120, whatever that number might be in his head. What do you think needs to continue, and what do you think needs to be improved?
First of all, Ishaq Dar needs to, like, be shipped in a box and put into the Bermuda Triangle. But, like, that aside, it's really interesting to see that Baqir was not kept as the governor. Word is that he did not want to stay governor, and then there's also word that he was not chosen to be governor. The two things, but it's really nice to see that the next governor will have 5 years. I really felt that 3 years is too less for any governor. So the next names that are coming in, it'd be really interesting if they're IMF people, because, the same like in opposition, the PMLN and PPP called the government PT-IMF or whatever, just because, IMF the governor, IMF the program. So, like, let's see whether.
Well, if we follow the trajectory of Pakistani politics, then perhaps the PTI will start saying IMF ka vice.
Of course. So, like, following Agent Baqir 007, let's see if we're having probably Dr. Asim Hussain agent coming in or whatever. So that's interesting, but it's really, so I personally feel that Baqir's legacy, and I don't want to celebrate him for doing his job, because he did his job. He did a good job, but, like, he was supposed to do a good job. That's why he was hired. But, like, my point is that the next central banker that comes in has big shoes to fill, because Baqir's shown a lot can be done in 3 years. Let's see what someone does in 5 years. So there's that. The momentum of growth at the central bank has actually grown. Things things have changed in the sense that a boomer mindset thoda change hua and it's been challenged. And changing a conservative central bank is actually a pretty big challenge, and that's been done. Personally, I feel that there's a lot to come out. So during Baqir's tenure, they're working on a data platform for the central bank where, just a World Bank website, and you can actually graphing tools and data tools. That was something that's going to be rolled out. That's something that he actually wanted to roll out.
Which Ariba personally is very excited about, because she has spent a lot of time going through different documents, PDFs, Excel sheets to find data, which is really hard to do.
It is so stupid. Everything is uploaded in PDF. And chalo, PDF to bardasht hai. Some people take pictures and then turn it into PDF. They print it, then they make it into PDF. Bhai, ajeeb. So keeping that in mind, I'm really excited about that, because that shows that you want people to be more informed. The state bank already does a great job at its data, in the sense that you can find a lot of things there. It's a gold mine for people that want to look up stuff. But the momentum's there. I personally feel that the central bank, again, is going beyond its role. And when I say beyond its role, I'm not saying that's going beyond its mandate. It's actually increasing its mandate, which is really interesting to see. And I'm really excited to see how the financial institutions in our country catch up. So again, when I see Dr. Asim Hussain, I see that he's not an old boomer, which is reassuring. Whoever does come in, I hope that they do not turn the state bank into an extension of the foreign finance ministry. But like things that Dar is saying that, we're going to go back on the, the state bank bill, state bank act, those are not reassuring. And personally, Dar coming back is bad, because the arbitrary number that the rupee should be in his head is all mumbo jumbo. It's like, I don't even want to get into it because it'll be very political, but it's all mumbo jumbo. The rupee should be near the rear. And if someone that calls the real effective exchange rate not real, I think that person needs to go back to school.
Yeah. I think that, and that's fueling uncertainty in the market right now. And I think
the market's going crazy. The stock market is down.
There's a lot of uncertainty, and of course there's global issues as well.
The rupee's at its highest.
192. Yeah.
192.
Or the lowest.
Like
the dollar is at its highest. The rupee's at its lowest.
The rupee's at its lowest. Uzair, this is the perfect time to send an Eid to all the kids in your family.
Yes. I got some hate for this, I think back on February 28, 2022, when the petrol price cut was announced. And I was like, if you're not ditching the PKR, you're making a mistake. And people are like, oh, you're fueling uncertainty. I'm like, no, I have friends and family in the country.
You're part of the conspiracy.
Yes, I am part of the conspiracy. And I think that might be the right note to end this, because we want the state bank to remain independent, and we want a credible governor, because it is beholden to the IMF, and because I am part of the conspiracy and you work for a business magazine, you have to appeal to the conspirators as well, because they have the money.
And to be very honest, I'd like to end on a very informative note that everyone here should understand. The IMF is not your enemy. आप बार-बार उनके पास लोन लेने जाते हो, वो बार-बार नहीं बोलते आप हमारे पास आओ लोन लेने के लिए. And if we ever completed an IMF program completely and listened to their suggestions, we would not have to go to them again and again and again.
I fully agree, and there are plenty of
Agent
countries.
Ariba.
Yeah,
Agent Ariba says bye-bye to Agent Uzair and everyone watching.
On that bombshell, we'll end this episode. Ariba, thank you so much for taking out the time. This was wonderful. Yes, the IMF is not the enemy. In fact, look, if people read its reforms agenda, it's actually going to improve lives for many, many citizens. But if we keep going back to them...
Is there one question before we leave, though?
Yeah.
I'm the person that's been on Pakistonomy the most, right?
As of today, yes. So you and I think Professor Ilhan Niaz are the most coveted guests on this podcast. So thank you so much for joining. Again, for those of you who want to learn more about OMOs, the link is below. If you want to follow what the State Bank does, check out Ariba's Twitter. It's very entertaining. And thanks for tuning in again. Khuda Hafiz.